Hi everyone, welcome back to Mission 1820 and this week's episode of Have You Ever Wondered? As always, if you're just joining us, we're in a series called Books of the Bible, and we've been giving introductions into each book of the Bible in just 5 minutes or less. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this week's book. This week, we're in the book of 1 Peter, and according to the very first word of the epistle, Peter actually identifies himself as the author of the book, and he also lets us know that he's an apostle of Jesus Christ. Peter wrote this letter sometime around AD 62 to 64 to a group of Christians who had been scattered throughout the northern areas of Asia Minor. Now, for some details of this book, some of the key people in the book will include Peter. You'll read about Silas. This was a companion of Paul's when he was on his second missionary journey. And then you're going to read about Mark, who is another apostle. As for some of the key places in the book, you're going to read about Jerusalem and Rome. You'll also read about the regions of Galatia, Pontus, and Cappadocia. Now, the book of 1 Peter is only 5 chapters, but it's divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is the salvation of the believer. This is in chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 12. Part 2 is the submission of the believer. This is in chapter 2, verse 13 through chapter 3, verse 12. And then part 3 is the suffering of the believer. This is in chapter 3, verse 13 through chapter 5, verse 14. So Peter wrote this book for the purpose of offering encouragement to suffering Christians because he knew the persecution of a person can oftentimes tempt them to actually turn back from Christ, to surrender and even give up, which is something that we may all have experienced at one time or another in our own walk with Christ. Peter began to see that many first century followers of Christ were suffering and were being abused and persecuted for believing in and obeying Jesus. And this began in Jerusalem at the hands of their Jewish brothers and began to spread to the rest of the world where Christians gathered. And this came to a pinnacle when Nero of Rome was determined to rid the empire of those who refused to follow Caesar. You see, Peter was no stranger to persecution and abuse because he suffered firsthand. He saw his fellow Christians die and the church being scattered. But Peter knew Christ, and nothing could shake his confidence in his risen Lord. So Peter wrote to the church that was being scattered and suffering for the faith. He wrote to them to give them comfort and hope, while also urging his fellow Christians to stay loyal to Jesus. 1 Peter focuses on the importance of believers holding up under unjust suffering and yet staying strong in their faith. And then in this way, 1 Peter could well be considered the Job of the New Testament, providing encouragement for the true believer to continue on in the way that Jesus had laid out for his followers. The book of 1 Peter is really a lesson for all of us because Peter's encouragement to the Christian reader is one of perseverance and faith. You know, we're all going to suffer persecution in our walk with Christ. But remember that following Jesus is a costly commitment. So when you're persecuted for your faith, rejoice that you've actually been counted worthy to suffer for Christ. And then remember this, trials are going to come and they're going to go. But the important thing to remember is that they will strengthen our faith in Jesus Christ. So with that, I hope that this is going to help you get a better understanding of 1 Peter. So God bless, and thanks for watching.